Hello everyone, this is Venom, and we are back with another Destiny 2 build video. Today we have got the Stasis Turret build for you for the Warlock. This one's going to revolve around the Osmiomancy gloves. Now, this build is going to be rated to go up in GMs. You also be able to use this in any kind of master dungeons or master raids, but this one is specifically built to handle Grandmasters. Now, how does this build work? What is it going to actually do? This build is going to help you to throw out a lot of different stasis turrets that are going to actually freeze enemies for you. So it's going to be a very crowd control heavy build. Now, the build is going to revolve around the Osmiomancy gloves and the Bleak Watcher turrets to keep the turrets out freezing enemies for you, and everything we add on afterwards is to help enhance that as well. Alright, so let's go with the Osmiomancy glove effects. It says, your cold snap grenades have an additional charge that recharges quicker on direct impact. The seeker spawned from cold snap grenades travel further. Now, since we're going to be using the Bleak Watcher turret for this, when we toss a grenade out, if it hits an enemy, it will actually bounce off of it. It's not going to spawn the turret until it actually hits the ground. However, if we hit an enemy with that bounce, that's going to give us grenade energy back. That speaks to the first part of the effect. Now, if we were just using the cold snap grenades by themselves without using the turret, then each enemy that we hit using that cold snap grenade would give us energy back. But we're not going to be doing that. We're using the actual turret form of it. Now, the other half of this build is going to be the Bleak Watcher stasis aspect. Now, what it does is, holding your grenade button is going to actually convert it into a turret. That turret is going to shoot out projectiles that are going to slow and freeze your enemies. So you're basically going to have your own auto turrets out that are going to be stopping enemies for you, okay? That's the entire core of this build. Alright, the way the build works is simple. You're going to get into combat. You're literally just going to hold down your grenade button. And it's going to charge up. You toss that charge out into the middle of your enemies. And the turrets are going to start freezing enemies for you. Now, these turrets do damage, but the big thing is that they're going to be actually slowing enemies. You can see they're slowing the wizards now. They will keep slowing them. And from there, you can pick off enemies. And that's it. That's the entire build's playstyle. It's going to be based around charging up the grenade as quickly as possible and tossing them out to freeze enemies for you. Now, everything else we're going to go over is going to be to facilitate getting your grenade energy back quicker. So, first we're going to go over the rest of our fragments and aspects, and then we'll go over to our mods and our weapon loadouts. Now, the second aspect we're going to be using, along with our Bleak Watcher, is going to be the Ice Flare bolts. What that does is, shattering a frozen target spawns seekers that track and freeze other nearby targets. What does that mean? It means when you shatter a target, when you freeze something, it's going to spawn almost like a threadling that's going to seek out another enemy, and it's going to freeze them when it hits them. So every time you shatter an enemy, it's going to freeze the next nearby enemy. So technically, if you were to freeze one enemy, you can technically keep that going as long as there are enemies around. So that's what the Ice Flare bolts are going to do. So that's going to help you continuously freeze enemies, even if you don't have a grenade ready to go. Now, for grenade, of course, we have to use a Cold Snap grenade. That's what the Osmiomancy works off of, the Cold Snap. As far as the melee, there's only one melee for the Stasis Warlock. Use whatever jump you want to. And as far as rifts, I would go with the Healing Rift. For most of the builds I do with Warlocks, I would definitely go with the Healing Rifts, just so you kind of have that at your oh shit button, you need to heal up. So go with the Healing Rift. Alright, next up for your fragments. First off, we're going to want the Whisper of Refraction. What that says is, defeating slowed or frozen targets grants you class ability energy. So we're going to be killing a lot of frozen targets, a lot of slow targets. We're going to want to get our class energy back. Now, that class energy will help us build up grenade energy, but we're going to get to that one later on. Next up, we've got the Whisper of Torment. You get grenade energy each time you take damage from targets. So just in case you're out, if you're taking any kind of damage at all, it's going to be helping you charge the grenade up even more. Like I said, everything we've got is going to be geared towards getting grenade charge back. Next up, we've got Whisper of Bonds. That is, defeating frozen targets generates an Orb of Power. We're going to be taking out a lot of enemies that are frozen, and we want to go ahead and get Orbs of Power to help feed us that energy to get our grenade charge back. Finally, we've got the Whisper of Rending. Whisper of Rending causes primary ammo weapons to do increased damage to stasis crystals and frozen targets. We're going to want to do more damage to our frozen targets so that we can shatter them quicker to get more Ice Flare bolts going out. So we're going to be using the Whisper of Rending for that one. Alright, next up, we got helmet mods. Like always, if you're running solo, 2 copies of Heavy Ammo Finder. If you're running in a group, your entire group should be running 1 copy of Heavy Ammo Finder, 1 copy of Heavy Ammo Scout. Next up, use whatever Siphon mod you want to add on there. It's going to depend entirely on the weapons you're going to run. I have some recommendations later, but you're more likely going to be running either Kinetic Siphon or Harmonic Siphon. Alright, next up, we've got the arm mods, and this one's going to be kind of weird. Now, because of the loadout we're using, our grenades are not going to be able to get kills. They're going to be freezing enemies, so we can't really rely on our grenades to get kills for Orbs of Power. We've got a melee. It's a mid-range melee, but we do kind of want to keep our distance with this build. So we're not going to really be able to count on getting any melee kills for this either to generate Orbs of Power. And of course, our dexterity and loader mods, we don't really care about them. And we're not really worried about the stat mods because we can just easily get stats we want. Again, we got the bolstering mods. We got bolstering detonation, which are grant class ability when you cause damage with a grenade. And it's not going to do much thanks to the fact that our grenade's not going to kill anything. And of course, we got focusing strike. Same thing. We're going to get class energy back when we get damage with a melee attack. None of these are really going to work out with the loadout we're using, so instead we're going to be using the grenade kickstart mod. What that does is we're actually going to be spending our armor charge to get back a huge chunk of grenade energy. So we're going to be using 2 copies of grenade kickstart. Now I would typically put in something in here to help us generate orbs of power, but because of the nature of this build, it's just not going to work. And then the last thing we add in is the fastball. This will help you get your grenade out there quicker so you can toss your turret further out there. Alright, next up for the chest. This one you've got a couple of different options. I would recommend having at least one charged up to help you get some armor charge up. But past that, it's really just going to be just whatever defensive mod you want as far as what it is you're doing. Now, we don't want to really be close to enemies, so I would suggest putting on a sniper mod, if anything. But for the most part, we're going to be staying back away from enemies, so we're not going to be on top of them. So you don't really got to worry too much about your resistance mods. I would go ahead and put in some charge up mods just so you have additional charges you can hold to help with your grenade kickstart. Past that, it's really going to be up to you. Like I said, I would add at least one charge up in there. Go ahead and add in whatever other resistance mods you want. Those are going to change depending on what content you're doing. And if you really want to have any extra heavy ammo, I would go ahead and toss in some reserves, depending on what it is you're doing. But the big one is definitely going to be the charged up mod. Again, at least one copy of that. Next up for our boots, we are going to be running, very important, stacks on stacks. This makes it to where when you pick up an overpower, it's going to grant you an additional stack. We're not going to be able to make as many orbs of power with this build as we can with other builds, so we want every single stack we can get out of this. So with 1 copy of stacks on stack, and with at least one copy of charged up, all you got to do is pick up 2 orbs of power to max yourself out. Again, you can go ahead and add in 3 stacks. If you can fit 3 copies of charge up in here, even better. But go ahead and have at least 1. Stacks on stack is going to work with that. With that, we're going to have in 1 copy of recuperation to heal us whenever we pick up an overpower. And of course, the big one is going to be the innervation mod. This is going to give you grenade energy each time you pick up an overpower. So that's going to be the big one we're going to be using for this. Finally, for the class, we've got 2 copies of bomber and 1 copy of powerful attraction. Now, you may ask why we're not using explosive finisher. If you wanted to use explosive finisher, that means you would have to actually get within melee range a lot more often. That would also mean you need to act or have on proximity ward as well so that you're not dying during those finishers. I don't recommend this on a range build like this one. You would need to have those 2 in. That would also mean that you wouldn't need the grenade kickstarts. Now, the grenade kickstarts will work from range. They don't rely on a kill. And again, when it comes to Grandmasters, we want as much stuff as we can possibly get that don't rely on kills. So grenade kickstart works on its own, versus doing something like explosive finisher. We would have to get an enemy low, then we'd have to finish them with the right amount of armor charges on. I don't recommend having that on there. Instead, I would go ahead and have on the bombers. It reduces your grenade cooldown when you use your class ability, so if you got just like a little bit of grenade recharge left to do, you can pop your class ability, and it's going to recharge your grenade a little bit. Again, when you're doing that, I would go ahead and use powerful attraction. That's going to bring any of the power close to you. They're going to suck them to you. If you want, like I said, you can go ahead and add on a 2nd copy of powerful attraction instead of one of the bombers. Now, you may be asking why I'm not using something like elemental charge and the leg mods. This build is also not going to be making a whole lot of stasis shards either, so we're not really going to rely on them too much. Now, there is another copy of this build you can do that's going to make a lot of stasis shards, but we're not using that. This build, again, is not going to make a lot of stasis shards, and it's not going to make too many orbs of power, so we're basically relying on not having generated any of that stuff. We're basically relying on just almost purely ourselves with no orbs of power and no stasis shards whatsoever. Finally, stats. Your 2 stats you're going to worry about are going to be resilience and discipline. Everything else is really going to be what you want. Resilience and discipline are the 2 that you need. Resilience, obviously, to help you take less damage, and discipline to help you get your grenade back quicker. I like to put the rest of mine in mobility because I'm a sociopath, but you guys can do whatever you want to in that one. The super for the Warlock is not really great. They have only got 1 super, that is the Winter's Wrath. Really, you're going to use this in case of emergencies. If you are surrounded by enemies, you got to quickly freeze things and get away. You're not going to be really using this for boss damage or anything. Alright, now as far as weapons go, you got a few options here. Now, you may be tempted to use something like Glass Curve or something like the Deliverance. I wouldn't recommend using Deliverance just because you're not really going to be using that to freeze enemies. It's going to be a very close-range weapon, and you don't typically want to get close range in a Grandmaster. Now, this will freeze enemies, don't get me wrong, but it usually takes a couple of shots, 2 to 3 shots, and you really don't want it to take that long to freeze an enemy. Now, for range stuff, you could use something like the Glass Curve. This is a good one that I like to use, however, not in Grandmasters, because its ability relies on getting kills. The way it works is, each time you get a kill with this thing, you actually get basically a special arrow charge. You can get up to 5 charges, and then when you hip fire the bow, it will actually shoot out stasis, or it'll actually spawn stasis shards where each of those arrows land. Now, it's cool, except for the fact that they rely on kills and not on actual like hits. Now, something like the Witchkeeper, which relies on hits, would be something I'd recommend instead if you wanted to use a bow, but it's not stasis. Not that it has to be for this build. Now, another good one. Now, here's a good one. You can use the Aegir Scepter. Now, because the Warlock Super is not too great, you can actually use the Aegir Scepter, which actually will drain your super energy and will overcharge the amount of damage the Aegir Scepter does. Now, this is a special ammo weapon. It's actually pretty good. This is one I use in Grandmasters quite a bit, especially if it's a season where, you know, it's overload stasis, right, or overload trace rifles or something like that. So it's not a bad one to use. There are other better exotics you could use, but if you wanted to do, you could. Again, also something like a prolonged engagement, SMG. I mean, really at this point, it's not going to be great for GMs if you're going just for the perks you can get, because this can get stasis perks. It's got on Hitstone on this one, which will give you a stasis crystal. It'll spawn a stasis crystal if you get a headshot kill. Again, I wouldn't recommend worrying about anything that relies on kills for this. Now, something like the Ricket Implement would be a lot better. I know this is really popular right now. People are using it. This is one where landing precision hits will actually slow targets, so this works perfectly for your build. It's also got the Tithing Harvest. And what it says is, while creeping attrition is active, destroying stasis crystals or landing precision final blows creates a stasis shard. The stasis shards return to you, and collect stasis shards or refill the magazine. Now, this is one, it doesn't necessarily rely on kills. It will rely on destroying stasis shards, though, or crystals. You're not going to have too many of those, so this is not necessarily great, but it's a lot better than some of these others, and it's long range, so that's really the big one. Really, for weapons for this, you can use really whatever you want to. If you really want to play into the freezing aspect of it, I would say the Winter Bite is going to be your best bet as far as any weapon. This is basically going to be another turret you can just deploy. You can use a special ability. It's going to deploy a ball. It's going to shoot out of stasis, and it's going to freeze everything around you. This is the only weapon I would say that I would actually recommend to run to actually work with the build. Everything else is really going to be dependent on what Grandmaster you're doing or what Master Raid or Master Dungeon you're doing. So the Winter Bite is going to be the one I'd recommend to run with this build. Everything else I'd run Legendary and just match up whatever it is you need for the activity you're doing. Again, this is not a build that's meant to do a lot of damage. This is a build that is meant to crowd control, and you really want to make sure you're playing into the crowd control aspect of that. So for that reason, I'd say the Winter Bite over any of these other options is going to be your best bet for an exotic. I think I can hear my baby calling, so I think that's about time for me to be done. So, that is the build, guys. Again, I will leave the dim link down below. Again, this is a build that is rated for Grandmasters, Master Dungeons, and Master Raids. I'm going to start actually telling you guys what the builds are rated for. I've kind of got down pat what I want to do as far as the format I'm doing now. I've been experimenting the last few videos, so I kind of know what I want to do or how I want to do these videos going forward, so it should make things a little bit easier for me to make these build videos. So, but that's going to do it for me today, guys. Like always, I'll leave a preview for the next build at the end of this one. Please subscribe to the channel if you like what it is we're doing. If you would like to see a build specific that you want me to make, please let me know down in the comments what builds you would like to see me do. Like the video if you like what we did, and thank you guys for coming. Here's a preview for the next build.